chapter of the Iterative Computer Society. My name is Tony Cole. I'm the chairman for this chapter. A couple of brief announcements, and then I'll introduce the speaker. First, for any of you who are looking for employment or know someone who is, my company is actually doing some hiring, so I recommend you check our website out. That would be Kelly Blue Book, or kbb.com. Again, if you're not looking but you know someone who is, there are software positions available currently. I think there were about 23 different positions throughout the company right now. Also, I would like to invite our IEEE members to volunteer. We have opportunities and positions open on our board. You don't have to be on our board to help out. We're not picky, except we are. Does anyone else have any announcements they would like me to forward? If not, I will go ahead and introduce our speaker, Mark Cruddington.
We have a speaker next month?
Yes, we do, on the 24th of January.
That's 2 months.
Sorry, yes, we do not have one next month. We were going to remind everyone after the presentation, but December is dark. December is dark. I say as the light gets very bright. This month is very light. So yes, our next presentation will be in December, January 24th.
Our next presenter is a faculty at Caltech. Faculty member of Caltech is going to discuss the state of the art of superconductors in the world today. Very exciting new field. In my humble opinion, it is the next bubble. Watch for it. Just as soon as room temperature superconductors are discovered, which they're predicting within 5 years, the whole electrical engineering world is going to turn over. It's going to be a whole new ballgame. The computers will be faster, will no longer be heat problems inside of huge VLSIs, dense VLSIs, storage, energy, just everywhere things will change. And we don't have to wait that long because it's already becoming more cost-effective companies to purchase what they call high-temperature superconductors, which is high temperature is in the neighborhood of 70 Kelvin. So it's actually more cost-effective to build some wires and some technology out of high-temperature superconductors than to use common copper. Cases in point are here in SoCal Edison. They're being used to condition the lines for power conditioning on the lines. Just here in SoCal Edison, we've got superconductors in the distribution stations.
I thought the paper was so high-tech.
They have superconducting technology in cell towers to reduce the noise. There are superconducting line conditioners all through Wisconsin and Michigan, where they have those big motors that crank up and they don't want to drown out the people in the neighborhood around them. They tried Tres Amigos in Arizona, where they're hooking up there's 3 power grids in the United States, and they're building a connector for the 3 of them at what they call 3 Rivers in Arizona, in New Mexico, so that we can distribute renewable energies.
Don, don't tell them too much. One will come in January.
Sorry, I just saw this woman today, and we just talked about this on that. It's so exciting. It's the next bubble. Trust me on this. Tell me you heard it from Dr. Black.
Dr. Digital.
Digital Dawn.
Okay.
So we'll see you guys in January.
Yes, absolutely. I should remind everyone, and I'll do it myself. I turned it fuzzy last night. Mark Cruddington is a national technology director of IT at GRC programs at Advantage Sales and Marketing, a 40,000 employee CPG sales and marketing company headquartered in Irvine, California. He's responsible for enterprise-wide IT governance, risk, and compliance, and program management related to GRC. He has over 15 years' experience in information technology and has been involved in agile development since 2000. Past positions include systems and software lab manager, senior systems and software engineer, senior network engineer, and senior consultant. He has owned 4 businesses, including his current one, Pacific Technology Consulting Group, LLC. Mark has an MBA from the University of California, Irvine, the Paul Mirage School of Business. And without further ado, I introduce Mark to you.
Well, I want to thank all of you, first off, for having me here. And tonight's presentation, though it's, as you can see, the usual death by PowerPoint, since it's Agile, we're going to do things a little bit different, and we're going to make this somewhat interactive. So one of my goals tonight is just to basically give you all kind of an overview of Agile development, maybe pique your curiosity in some of the methodologies that are being used currently, and some of the ones that are on the rise and getting a lot of the publicity. I also hope that you will participate. You've got to participate in the presentation, and you'll see that in a moment. So we'll get on to what the agenda is. And as you can see here, it's not in any particular order, but these are some of the topics that we'll be covering. Agile types, framework, process, buzzwords, resources, adapting to Agile, Agile principles, estimating, planning, and Scrum, which is an Agile methodology, and iterative or predictive type methodologies, impediments, tools, and Agile success and evolution. Now, I said this is interactive, and hopefully you'll participate. And what's actually going to happen is I have some pictures here, and I'd like for you guys to choose the picture, and then we'll talk about that topic. So this is not going to be in any particular flow or anything like that. The only thing that I will start, though, is I will begin with the first topic, which is really about Agile and the Agile principles. For those of you that don't know, there was a group of 15 developers that got together in somewhere, I believe in Utah, Snowbird or somewhere, and they discussed better ways to do software development. They weren't happy with the traditional waterfall methodology that was very taxing, slow, and they wanted a better way to interact with customers. So they got together and they came up with what's called the Manifesto for Agile, or for software development. I'm not going to read through this, but I will just tell you that the principles behind Agile really are individuals over interactions, and then working software, customer collaboration over contracts, and then responding to change over following a plan. If you've all done any type of waterfall development methodology, you'll know that it strictly follows a plan, and you cannot go to the next phase until you've satisfied the initial phase. So next are the principles, and there are 12 principles, 6 of them here. I'm not going to read through each and every one of the principles, but I do want to stress that they do stress in Agile principles to satisfy the customer. You're also going to see that there's a lot that has to do with change and adapting to change. Change is constant in software development. I don't know how many of you have ever worked on a software project where the beginning requirements matched up what you've done on at the end, or the end product is. If there is anyone in here, please show me your hand.
What are you talking about?
Exactly. And just as an interruption, how many in here are actually software developers or working in some form of software? Okay. How many of you are currently developing using some type of agile methodology? Are you fully following the agile methodology, or just using some of the principles?
No, that's a. I would probably take it up later, but I don't know what really fully following it.
Okay.
I follow as I understand it.
Okay. All right. And again, another principle in agile software development is you're going to release code often and develop continuous builds, continuous integration. This is primarily to find defects in the beginning, rather at the end. The common waterfall methodology, you go through the initial planning, requirements, then you do the development, and then at the end you have the test to see if everything came together fine. Agile, as we'll see, is a little bit different than that. And then again, we see that working software is the priority in Agile. And it's a very collaborative environment. It's not, when we talk about Agile, we don't just talk about the development team. You'll see later on in the presentation that in order to really reach the full implementation or full impact of Agile, the whole organization has to be Agile, so to speak. Because if you're developing software faster, your releases are going to happen faster, therefore marketing is going to have to do their job, sales, and everything's really got to align. And simplicity in the code development, it's not the strenuous, heavy-loaded developing effort that goes on. Very much collaborative, and there's a lot of refactoring of the coding that goes on in Agile. And this is just up here to show you the 15 people that came up with this manifesto. People on here that are quite, you'll see quite common when you do your research is Kent Beck, Mike Beadle, Ken Schwaber, who's on the right toward the bottom, and then Jeff Sutherland. You see a lot of them when you're doing your research. They write a lot of articles. And Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber were the gentlemen that founded Scrum, if you've heard of that methodology of Agile development. Okay, so this is where you guys get to participate. Anyone here want to point out a picture you'd like to learn about?
Sure, the last one.
The one down at the very end,
Yes.
the B?
Yes.
Okay, that's a simple one. This is really one slide, and it's buzzwords. Done is, in Agile, when you complete an iteration or a sprint, you have to define as a team, a whole team, not just the Scrum team or the Agile development team, but really in the release planning, what done is. In some instances, done will include the testing, all the testing that's done. Now this may not be possible when the contract states you have to have 2 months of, say, regression testing and so forth. So the team may say, well, what done is we've gone through unit tests, we've gone through integration tests, now we need to do the final testing at the end to satisfy the contract. And so commonly you'll see, is it done, or when is it done, being talked about in Agile. Then continuous integration. This is an interesting concept that's catching on. It's basically you're integrating the code as often as possible on the team. At least every individual that's on the development team will have to check in their code or integrate their code daily. Now, you might say, okay, great, everybody can do it at the end of the day. We have one build. That's not the case. You can check in your code anytime and integrate your code anytime. Whenever you integrate your code, it kicks off a build. So if you have 12 developers on your team, you might have 12 builds throughout the day. Now, if you think about this in an 8-hour day, you might be having a build every 45 minutes or so. So it becomes very important for your build time to be very quick and all of the testing and so forth to be automated, to go through the integration of the build. And when you check in your code, you've got this automated testing that's doing the unit testing as well. And then Kanban is basically just a lean type of manufacturing. It came out of Toyota. And you start seeing that now introduced into software development. It's basically the same type of process, but in software you'll see just-in-time requirements. Same concept as lean, if you've all heard of lean. Okay, anyone else?
Think of the cards.
The cards. Good, very good.
I see some strange combinations, 6 cards, and all those pictures.
This is basically agile types. If you look at the list of agiles, there's got to be at least 12 that's out there that people are talking about. There's a lot of questions on whether these types are actually agile or not. And you'll see here that when someone goes to implement an agile process, they may not be aware of it, they are aware of it, they may not be fully utilizing it, but you see this was done from a Forrester survey in 2006 actually on Agile. Have they implemented Agile? How familiar are they? Are they interested in adopting Agile? And so this is that graph. 44% were just not interested. That's interesting. Especially this is 2006. And here you'll see the list of Agile methodologies. Out of the people they surveyed, this was in Q3 of 2009. This is stepping ahead 3 years. 35% were using Agile. We had 30% that were not using a formal methodology in their software development process. And then iterative and then waterfall. Out of the Agile process, you see that Scrum was the first. Most of the people were being used. And then we have Agile modeling, feature-driven development, which was your favorite, right? Or test-driven. And that's what I'm kidding. And then we had extreme programming. Now, you do see a lot of people combining some of these methodologies with other methodologies. Primarily, you see a lot of people using Scrum with XP or Scrum with feature-driven development or test-driven development. Scrum really, in my opinion, it is agile, and I don't want to upset the individuals that founded Scrum, but it's more project management than it is a technical technique for developing software, developing products. You combine, say, feature-driven development or test-driven development into Scrum, and then you have your engineering technique along with your project management technique, and it really helps you scale up. You cannot scale either one of those without the other, to where you cannot optimize the Agile process without the others. And if you can imagine, you have a Scrum team, and not all of the team is using the same technique and so forth. Or you have multiple Scrum teams working on the same product, and they're all using different methodologies. Kind of issues that you might run into.
That is true for many of these. For example, Six Sigma by itself, I don't think it's, it has to be combined with the rest of the stuff.
Yes, yeah. And many of these are more or less techniques, and I think Scrum, if you look up there, in terms of project management, Scrum would be the only project management. The others, you would need some form of project management to go along with it. Yes?
What are the reasons for the selection of a particular engineering method or methods to use with Scrum? Why would someone select, say, test-driven as opposed to feature-driven or
Well, it's pretty much the characteristics of each methodology that's there. Test-driven methodology, what you're doing is...
I mean, this is just example.
Yes.
Among all that's available, among the respondents, do they indicate why they selected a particular method or methods?
Why do they select?
Right.
Probably familiarity more than anything. And it just depends on how you want to do your development. We're test-driven, you're writing your test cases. Feature-driven, you're concentrating more on features. And extreme programming is really a lot agile, a lot like Scrum. You're not necessarily concentrating on feature, or that you're more or less concentrating on your customer. And there is a lot of collaboration. That's why there's a lot of synergy between XP and Scrum.
What's the difference between Agile and iterative development? Does it make a difference between the two?
There really isn't a difference. Agile is iterative development. You're developing
But not here.
in...
See, here you make 35% is Agile and 21% is iterative.
First agree.
So blue versus green.
I think the iterative is more a modeling process. It's modeling intensive, but for all intents and purposes, Agile is an iterative type development as well. You are developing in iterations. So you have cycles in a sprint.
Question. When you were talking about Scrum, I may have misheard you, but I thought you said that you typically have to marry it with some other Agile form of development in order to fully utilize it. The example you gave were an organization, say, using Scrum, but using different Agile methodologies. But most organizations probably wouldn't be using different development methodologies inside that organization, right? So why couldn't you use Scrum with some iterative process, for example? Or am I reading too much into this?
No, you absolutely could. But in terms of optimizing Scrum, if you want to get the most out of Scrum, you could use, in Scrum, there is no technical definition on the type of development you should use. Okay, it's more a project management process than the action. And when I say development, I mean the coding aspect of it. Or say extreme programming does have that coding aspect, such as pair programming and so forth. So that's why I say, you have a process for your project management, your Agile process, but then you also have a technical process as well.
Are you going to explain each of these types at some point?
I will explain, yes, and not each of them, but
Also the main one.
the four major ones, yes. And I'll start next. Oh, okay. Here we're talking about what makes a methodology agile. And you have individuals and interactions. Then these go along with the principles we saw earlier: working software, customer collaboration, and then responding to change. You can see that Agile is very adaptive. Principles. There's phases. Minimal planning is done in Agile. Scalable. Continuous process refinement. You're always revisiting the process, getting feedback. It's iterative and incremental. Working software. Artifacts are minimized documentation. And there's customer involvement. It's adaptive, empirical customer relationship. And the requirements, they do embrace change. They're emergent, just-in-time requirements. And there's a frequent inspection.
You back on that slide, as part of the individuals and interactions and Agile types, you have the bullet scalable. But most of the critiques I read on this, that is one of the critiques they have about Agile, right? Is no one is quite sure how scalable it really is.
That's true.
Are you asserting that it is scalable? Is that what you're saying?
I'm asserting that is one of the principles in order to become Agile, is to be scalable. And again, when we get further on down, you'll see that some of the issues that we have with calling these methodologies, calling themselves agile. Are they really agile according to the principles?
I see.
So,
Thank you.
Okay, the gentleman first.
Yeah. You talking about me? Two questions. One, you're saying no documentation.
no,
And
limited
You
documentation.
just talked about measured progress. How do you know if you're making progress if you don't have documentation?
When
You don't know where you're going.
And you know, you do know where you're going in story points. There's a limited amount of documentation that's done in story points. The requirements are the story points or your product backlog. How you're done, how you know you're getting somewhere is
Story
through this
points or product backlog.
requirements, the user requirements, basically.
Okay.
So how you know you're done is, in Agile, you have what's called a sprint or an iteration. When you complete that iteration, you interact with your customers, internal, external. You give a demo, you talk about what you've completed, you show them what you've completed, and they provide you feedback. And have you satisfied what they're looking for?
I'm sorry, but it sounds like smoke and mirrors.
If you're delivering, I understand, but if you're delivering a working software and you have your customer in front of you or in a meeting, and you show them what you've done and it satisfies what they're looking for,
Again, that stuff is not smoke and mirrors. How can, or maybe with the difference here, maybe it goes back to scalable. So we're talking about really small projects. If you could actually demonstrate to someone what it is that the product does, and it's not really a big project.
no, well, again, we're talking about one iteration. You in a release itself, in a product release, you might have 6 iterations that last a month long, or maybe even longer. You know, we're just talking an increment. So an increment can last from 2 to 4 weeks. And then you may have, your release is 1 year, lasts 1 year, so you'd have 12 iterations. But at each iteration, you want to deliver working software that could stand on its own.
My question is, now that you mentioned iterations, what's the difference between phases and iterations? We're talking about absence of phases, yet we have iterations. Conceptually, isn't it the same thing in essence?
No, because if you go by phase, and we'll see that in the iterative versus predictive, in a phase you have your initiation phase, then you'd have your design phase, then you'd have your development phase, then you might have your testing phase, then you might have your implementation phase, then you might have a maintenance phase. Well, at the end of one increment in an agile development, you will have your requirements, your design. You will have your development. You will have your integration. You'll have the implementation. You'll have the testing. And then it's released, and you get the feedback. So it's essentially bundling these phases into one increment. Now, how well that's done, it's up to the company to do that. And it's not easy. It's not easy to do. This is not. I mean, if you think of what goes into that, you're testing, you're building, you're integrating. So, yes.
So for Agile programming, do you guarantee we're going to have a good quality software? Because you try to focus on customer satisfaction, and you're not focusing on documentation for future development or future maintenance. And you just want to get the software working.
Well, let me think. What Windows release was that?
Vista.
Vista. Were you happy with Vista? So in order to be happy, you can't release buggy code. That's just...
Well, with Microsoft,
Yes,
you have to skip every alternate release.
Right.
You skip ME and then you skip Vista.
So quality is embedded in the principles as well. And that's why they take it. You're not trying to bite off the whole, how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. That's the same thing with Agile. You're not trying to take on more than you can handle in thinking about what is involved in Agile. It's the entire process, going from the design, the coding, the testing, the integrating, and implementing it all together in that one increment. And that's why you have, on your team 5 to 9 developers, and you're only taking, say your iteration lasts a month. You don't want to take so many things from your product backlog where when you break that product backlog or the requirements down into tasks that you can't get complete. So.
Don't you think it's 6 of one, half dozen of other? Because if you're talking about big projects, sometimes it may not be possible to divide the project into small deliverable segments, which Agile is really suited for. Sometimes it may not be possible. You're talking about 50-man team, you're talking about the whole, whole development.
Agile may not be for you.
Agile may not
have a 50-man
team. So we have to keep that in mind. It's for smaller projects, smaller deliverables, and smaller teams. If you're talking about 200-man team, 2-year project, Agile is not the thing which you really adopt.
And I would say it's more the size of the team versus it is the length of the project. So
it is, you're right.
Yes.
So what are the results that you have seen using Agile?
Me personally, or you do have quicker time to market. You do have a higher level of quality. You find your defects out. If you think about the waterfall methodology, and let's say your release cycle for waterfall is going to last 1 year, when do you normally find out about your defects using a waterfall type methodology? You're probably 75% done in terms of time with the project when testing starts. Well, in waterfall or in Agile, you would find out within a month or month and a half after the first increment or iteration is done, your first sprint. You would find out the defects, and you're slowly adding on and adding on. You start with the riskiest first, the product backlog, the user requirements that are most important, and those are prioritized by your product backlog or your manager, your product owner, which is someone from the business, and then they set the priority of the product, the features that they want built. And then the Agile team takes each of those and divides it among themselves.
I'm still concerned about the minimized documentation. Really, how do you maintain the system 2 years from when it's over? Do you know how to maintain it? Because people all gone, Agile all gone. How do you go back to maintain? Nobody writing down anything, right? Is it a typical case?
No, it is one of those
trade-off.
Yeah, trade-offs. The other thing is you may have a documentation team that comes in after the Agile team to do more documentation. You do have ways to maintain your requirements and so forth. So, but it is one of those negatives against Agile.
Actually, back to what you said is, depending on what methodology for your software development you use, you could have automated documentation generated by the code, right?
Right.
So in some Java or Eclipse environment, if that is your development environment, your documentation is already done for you. So that's one plus and fits into this really nice.
But then you're relying on what developers understand.
Correct.
And the problem most of the times comes in, developers don't understand what has been told to them.
and that is where Agile is good, because there is this user interaction with your customers.
Yeah.
And a sprint or a increment lasts 4 weeks. At the end of that 4 weeks, the customer is going to come back and look at what his requirements were, match up to what you've done, and then give you feedback. From that feedback, you might have additional product backlog requirements that are developed.
Yeah.
And then you go forward again.
It's a catch-22. I mean, you get the customer's feedback. Customers, most of the time, to start with, don't know what they're asking.
And that is the perfect reason for
That's a
Agile.
perfect example here. But the thing is, unless you have a small enough project which you can componentize, where each component is a standalone component by itself.
Increment, yes.
Because if you're talking, again, comes to the same thing. If you're talking about large project, that it cannot be componentized in 4 weeks duration, so whatever the agile methodology you're taking. It becomes very difficult. I mean, it is, for a small team, small projects, it really works perfect. But the reason I'm saying it is I'm sitting here and saying, I need to do a project which takes 30 man years, 30 man-powers, or 60 man-power to be delivered in 6 months. How do I decomponentize that and make sure it works? I mean, it's just not possible.
I want to hear what the techniques are, what the types are, before we try to argue about which ones we should use.
Okay. So this is feature-driven development.
Real quick on the continuous improvement.
Integration?
Yes, if you could, continuous process refinement.
Yes.
How extensive is it? And what do we cover?
At the end of an increment, and actually on a daily basis, you go through what's called a daily stand-up. In Scrum, it's a daily Scrum. You're giving feedback, what you've done, what you're going to do the next day, and then any impediments or things that are in your way. The Scrum Master will take care of that. The team will help you out if you're having issues. So that is an area of process refinement. At the end of your iteration or your increment, you go through the same thing. You go through what's called a sprint retrospective, and then getting feedback from the customer, the end user. So that's where you're refining your process also. And then you also have your own team meeting about how did our engineering technique, how did the process work out, and we'll see that.
Do you document it, or is it just on ongoing basis, you do it and you forget it? In the sense of what the reason was for the change, not the change itself.
The actual guideline, it's up to the team.
Okay.
It's really up to the team. The daily Scrum is probably not documented, but I would say if you're going to implement a change, you might want to have an idea of what you need to implement in some way documented. Now, how heavy of documentation is that? It may not be that much at all.
Bring in a team afterwards to document for the videos.
I think what you have here, so you have a modeling and agile, yes, you go hand in hand very well.
Yes.
And that's the key. If you don't have your modeling, you can't do agile.
Now, and in some cases there isn't modeling for agile. So it really we're getting into more engineering techniques again. So yes, you can have modeling. It's done. A lot of them do have modeling.
But the modeling really helps you
Yes.
keeping the smaller segments,
very
and that's what I'm saying. The
Right.
UML and agile go hand in hand, because if you don't model that, unified modeling really helps in agile. If you don't have unified modeling, you can do agile.
You actually get your refactoring right there from the UML.
Yes, you have to do that.
You see, this is more, FDD is more of a mix, a hybrid of agile and a predictive model, because you do things in sequence, but then you also have iterations as well. So, and you see down here best practices, you have object modeling, there's visible progress. Always in agile you want the visible progress, and that's through increments, smaller chunks, regular builds. That's a constant in all agile methodologies. And then good configuration management. The best practices, all 8 of the best practices. These are 8 best practices. And they say it requires all 8 to be feature-driven development.
Yes, 7. I think there are 7.
No, there's 8.
1, 2,
3, 3,
4,
2.
5, 6, 7.
3,
I'm counting
3,
commas. Yeah.
3,
2. There are 2 there.
1, 2,
okay, 3.
3. You're scaring me here. That's a test, right?
I can blame it on mine.
We have some of the features that are involved in XP. Similar to XP, you have user stories. These are your requirements. or Scrum backlog. Extreme programming is XP. Your increments, they say 2 weeks. You have a feature set, which is feature-driven development, it's a collection of features. Then assigned to a chief programmer and a team, similar to other methodologies. Then just what a major feature set is, a domain area. Going back to our criteria here, is it agile? Well, you see, it's not very, in feature-driven development, the actual development team is not as empowered as in other agile methodologies. They're not so much self-organizing either. There are phases, and with the modeling, there is a lot of planning and design that goes on. There isn't this continuous feedback that you'll see in other methodologies. And when I say there isn't an actual process in place for that. Now it may happen, but it's not been defined within the methodology. It is somewhat incremental because you have the 2-week iterations or sprints or whatever. The working software is not a measurement of progress.
So what is?
It's actually more time-driven than anything in how you're modeling, the amount of modeling is done and that versus delivering working software, going through the demo with your customer. Artifacts are minimized, and then you do have customer involvement, customer relationship, emergent requirements. They don't really have this, like in other methodologies, where you can have a change in the requirements in the middle of an iteration or in between iterations. But there is frequent inspection. So, is it agile or not? Then the next on the list is agile modeling. Again, we have the same type of principles in the Agile Manifesto, where you have values, principles, and practices. They state this is meant to be tailored into other methodologies, and in my opinion, I believe they're talking about a project management type methodology versus maybe extreme programming or another technical type of methodology. You see the principles, they closely match up to what we saw earlier in the manifesto, which is simplicity, then embracing change, incremental change, rapid feedback, model with a purpose, and then multiple models, travel light, meaning just discard anything that you don't need, and then communication, and then there is a focus on quality and agile modeling. And this, by the way, I believe was the #2 methodology used.
When you say model with purpose, no. Are we looking into knowing what the customer requirements are, so we can then translate into whatever?
Yes, more or less the design aspect, yes.
Okay.
These are some of the best practices that were listed in Agile modeling. Again, just barely good enough. So don't go beyond, just do what is necessary, what the requirements are. Document continuously, so Agile, are you documenting a lot or not? Well, here we do, so document late.
What are the relationships?
I don't know if he was